3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Hey everybody, this is Mark from Manhattan Beach Studios, and I want to talk a little bit about a project we've been working on lately. We are building this OB van. It's an outside broadcast van, but what that really means to us is live streaming. We want to be able to go somewhere, plug cameras in, record, do everything we need to do super fast. Now, there are a lot of ways to get signals in, and the big issue is that we don't always do the same thing every day. As a matter of fact, very rarely do we do the same thing any 2 days in a row. And what that means, practically speaking, is if we're not able to route things where we need to, when we need to, then we run into a lot of problems. Sometimes we don't have the wires we need. And so what we did when we first started with this van is we had splitters. Everything that came in was split 4 ways, and we had patch bays and all kinds of stuff that we picked up on YouTube and B&H and everywhere else, where we were able to take a signal from someplace and get it somewhere else. And we spent all this time with wires everywhere. But lately we've decided that that didn't make any sense, and so what we did was we invested in something that honestly is one of the most valuable things that we could ever have purchased. And I wanted to take a minute and talk about what the Smart Hub is. In this particular one is from B&H. There are other options out there. There are matrix switchers and things like that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this particular unit because it's really saving our butt. And basically what the Smart Hub is a lot of wires that are all automatically plugged in everywhere. So while we needed switchers we needed a matrix switcher up front in order to get a signal to one monitor or to multiple monitors. All of that has gone away. We also needed distribution amps where we could take one SDI signal and turn it into 5. And now we don't need that anymore. So let me talk a little bit about what this is trying to solve. When we had a live stream before, we would have a good looking picture, a final product, a program feed. And that program feed needed to have a lot of things happen to it. Number one, it needed to go back into the studio so people could see it. Number two, it had to go to recorders so it could be recorded. Number three, it's possible that we were sending that to the front seat or to somebody else who was sitting somewhere else that had to work on it. We needed to send it to a graphics desk. Who knows where it needed to go? But an incoming camera signal might once again need to be routed. And so you might need it to go to a recorder. You might need it to go into the input of the live streaming box or the switcher. In some cases, we had jobs where we needed to go to both a hardware switcher and a software switcher at the same time when we were using the hardware switcher, let's say, to go to iMag and put that up on a projection screen, and separately so it could be switched. And so we were always using wires and plugging one thing in and running plugs out of that all over the place. And it was a pain, a huge pain. And as we started to build the van with more and more options, the one thing that became obvious was we couldn't comprehend the amount of wires that we were doing and how we were getting tangled up. And if you were to have looked in the back of the van early on, it was an absolute spider web. And quite literally, I think people may have died back there. So it didn't seem like something I wanted to spend money on. And that's one of the real problems, is sometimes the things you spend money on are the things that seem like they make the least amount of difference and that clients won't appreciate at all. But we went ahead and we invested in something called the Smart Hub. And we went for the 40 by 40 thinking, well, we have a lot of wires. We might have more than 40 inputs and we might have more than 40 outputs. So let's at least go with 40 by 40. But when we did this, it looked like we only had 8. As a matter of fact, when we started working up this chart where we are starting to look at our inputs and our outputs, it still looks like we only have really 20. But in fact, that's not really true, because every piece of gear we buy uses a lot of new inputs and outputs. For instance, we're looking right now at putting another ATEM here into this van, and the ATEM will have 8 SDI inputs and 3 or 4 more SDI outputs. So right off the bat now we're up near 30 on the input side, and we're actually coming close to maxing out our outputs. So having as many of these inputs and outputs there for you to use is absolutely critical. Now, let me tell you the way this works, because it's like not just a patch bay, but it's an unbelievable splitter. So we take a signal that comes in and we can then decide where we want to send it. So let's say I'm running a signal off of a camera. We're going to pretend that this Atomos here is actually a camera signal. And I want to put that camera signal here, let's say on monitor 2. What I do is I simply go to the destination and I say I want to go to monitor 2, which is tagged here at input number 9. So I say my destination should be 9, and my source for this is going to be Atomos number 1. And as soon as I do this, you'll see that it switches. I can then go and put something different here on this first one. I could say I want to go destination here, and this monitor is set to 8, and I want to go source, and let's go with 2. So it looks like a really cool patch bay, but its value is also in its switching, because I know that if I want to send this to a recorder, I can simply come in here and I can then assign this signal back to the hyperdeck or back to the other Atomos as a recorder. I can then take this signal and route this back. We have 4 transfers back to the studio, transfers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I can simply assign this to transfer 1, which then sends that signal back into the studio. So I'm not limited to the number of wires or the number of plugs or the number of anything. I can simply assign this source to any number of destinations. And then it goes there, and it's simple, and it's done, and it's been unbelievably reliable. The hardest part of the whole thing is actually keeping track of all my options. We are looking at this in terms of every possible place we could think of and every possible input we could think of. And we're filling this list up at light speed. But there are a couple other things that are worth mentioning, things that you don't think about. Like, for instance, we have on this list something called the decimator. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with the decimator, the converter, the cross converter. And the decimator is an amazing unit at scaling. Well, one of the things about the Smart Hub is that it doesn't do any scaling. It simply takes the input and it sends it to an output. But let's say I needed to scale that for some reason. Well, no problem. Instead of sending it direct to the output, I could send the source directly to the decimator, scale it however I need to, and then the decimator output comes right back into the hub. And I can then take that hub and assign it to where it needs to go. So you might be asking, why is this something that might be important? Well, take a look at things like computer screens. Let's say the computer screen is coming in a format that I don't like, or it needs to be bigger, or it needs to be smaller, or something like that. By having the decimator as a standalone, ready-to-go scaler for any input that I have, means that I can immediately take advantage of that particular video signal. There are a couple other things here that are even cooler. Like, for instance, we have over here the Yamaha TF1 mixer. Now, I have a number of camera sources coming in, each one that may have audio built in, and I may have other audio sources coming in, and we may have a mixer out in the field, a sound tech that is feeding audio into one of those cameras so that we can run that signal back to us by fiber. Okay, so in other words, the audio I may want to use may be on any camera, and I don't know which camera that is. So what we did was we plugged in a de-embedder. So we can not only embed, but de-embed, and we're able to pull out the audio signal off of any SDI input regardless. Now, what's interesting about this is the de-embedder that we found was dirt cheap. We found an HDSDI audio embedder, de-embedder, for next to nothing, but it only is HDSDI. And so one of the things that our decimator can do is take any signal that we have and convert it to HDSDI, in which case we can then reassign that back to the de-embedder, pull the audio off directly into the mixer, and we can then mix that live right off the camera input. So we have no limitations because we're able to assign things anywhere we want, including to things that embed, that de-embed, that scale, that convert, whatever we want. And we've also plugged in HDMI converters into this thing. And the HDMI converter means that we can assign any number of inputs to HDMI signals and bring those signals right in and switch them right over. And because they've converted to SDI, they'd be simply assigned wherever we want them, whether it's to the Vmix box or the ATEM switcher or whatever we want. And we can also take, while we're on that topic, a teleprompter. We can take a teleprompter feed, put it right into this unit where we're able to then record it as an ISO. We can send it back to the room via one of our transfer channels, or we can mix it. We can put it on the lower third or a corner picture. Essentially, the teleprompter is another input. And it can be used as a teleprompter and sent back to the room and used as a picture that we have here. So lots of options. One more option it's worth mentioning is we also have, sitting right up here, a multi-viewer. That's made by, once again, it's a decimator system here. And, and many times our clients need to see more than one picture. And while we can do that via some of the macros that we have built into the ATEM, or we can build it through some of the through some very simple setups with our Vmix, we can also do it from a hardware solution where we simply assign any 4 inputs that we want to the multi-viewer, and we take the multi-viewer output, bring it right back into the hub, and we could send that wherever we want once again. So now any multi-view that we want can come from any of those sources or the multi-viewer itself. In addition to that, because we're running the ATEM multicam out, we have that as an input. And we can take that and assign it to any mix, or once again, through one of our transfer channels, send it back to the room, and so a director can be making calls from inside the room. Now on another video, we're going to talk a little bit about our communication system and why it doesn't really matter where we send it or where anybody's standing. The director can be here in the van, or can be inside the room, can be inside a venue, can be remote, anywhere we want, because we can assign any video to any location. We're able to get instantaneous feedback. And then lastly, it's worth mentioning that we have a Teradek cube here in the van. And we can assign anything, whether it's the program feed or any input, to the cube, and we can distribute the cube video anywhere we want. We can send that back into the room. We can do on-set monitoring here. We can do offset monitoring, or we can simply send a feed back to some director in some other location. So just like using Zoom or any other offset monitoring technique, we do have the ability to use the cube's offset monitoring, which can be highly encrypted, password protected, impossible to see otherwise. And we can send that back to somebody else to be able to work with. So, in summary, coolness. Anything we need to do is sort of now routed into this smart hub, which is essentially now the brain of the entire van. And so I wanted to take some time and talk about the value of this thing, why it's important, what it does for us. It's going to save us a tremendous amount of time by not having to reroute wires or anything we need to do. And so I hope that helps give you an explanation for the power of some of these pieces of gear that clients don't always appreciate. And hopefully it adds a lot of value to you in your life. It's certainly adding value to us in ours. So with that said, until next time.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!